Hi, Year 9. So I thought I'd make our second lesson about Shakespeare's use of language for you as well today. So I'm going to make this available to you for Tuesday, the 22nd of June. I'm in school on Tuesday, so I won't be available as easily if you've got any problems, but I will be checking my emails once I'm back from school at around lunchtime. Right, so Shakespeare's use of language, lesson 2, Mr. Nelsey's Year 9 class. So the first thing today is just this idea of the patterns and structures of language. So we're going to be looking at some of the ways in which Shakespeare uses or creates patterns and structures within language and how those patterns and structures have an effect in terms of enhancing a meaning or displaying a character's kind of personality or, that kind of thing. So here's our intro, the patterns and structure of language. We can look at specific patterns and choices in the organization of language in order to get a sense of the mood or feel of a scene, speech, or dialogue. Example: Shakespeare often ends scenes with rhyming couplets to sum up a character's state of mind, or to remind the audience what has just happened or is about to happen. And Richard says this at the end of Act 1, Scene 1. Clarence still breathes, Edward still lives and reigns. When they are gone, then I must count my gains. As you can see, the rhyme there between reigns and gains is the couplet, and it works in a way to really emphasize the next part of Richard's plan. By having that reign and gain together, while Edward still lives and reigns, then Richard's actually got nothing. When they're gone, when he's got rid of Edward, that's when he can start to really see how successful he's been. So that couplet reinforces about what's going to happen in the story. So the three things we're going to look at today in the patterns of structure and language are in orangey yellow word battles, in green contrasts, and in blue patterns of three or lists. And hopefully these will be fairly straightforward and obvious once we get into the actual mini lessons. So let's move on with that now. Oh, so word battles. Word battles are when characters use language as a weapon and fight against each other, and the battles will be performed with intense emotion and expression as each character tries to strike at their opponent. So rather than using swords or guns or daggers or fists or sticks or whatever, the words do the fighting. Okay, and the three word battles here have been selected for you. The first one, uh, with the red around it, is Richard and Anne from early in Act 1. Richard says, "Sweet saint, for charity be not so cursed." And Anne retaliates with, "Foul devil, for God's sake hence and trouble us not." Okay, and the colour coding there that I've put in for you, I've kind of married up similar elements. So what kind of makes Richard's line battle up or square up to Anne's reply. Next one, in green, Clarence and the first murderer. Thy voice is, Clarence says, thy voice is thunder, but thy looks are humble. First murderer, my voice is now the king's, my looks mine own. So again, I've used colour coding to link the ideas from Clarence's sentence or phrase and how the first murderer battles those words with his own kind of spin on them. The third one, in the yellow, is between Richard and Elizabeth. Richard says, be eloquent on my behalf to her. Elizabeth, an honest tale speeds best being plainly told. Richard, then plainly to her tell my loving tale. Elizabeth, plain and not too honest is too harsh a style. Richard, your reasons are too shallow and too quick. Elizabeth, oh no, my reasons are too deep and dead. Too deep and dead, poor infants in their graves. Now the third one, the one with the yellow highlight here, if you look at that one, I've only color coded in blue, and that's because those blue words kind of all kind of link together and bounce off each other a little bit. Sometimes it's repetition, Sometimes it's kind of moving an idea forward slightly. Sometimes it's a response to what's gone before. So they are kind of in a word battle is a bit more complicated. In the third example from the first two, which is much more kind of one says this, the other says that. With Richard and Elizabeth, it kind of they twist around each other a little bit more. That might be an important point to make when you come to write about them. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, so here's the task for these word battles. And I've asked you to pick one of the word battles below and explain how the use of language demonstrates the conflict between the two characters. So what I'm looking for here in your answers, you're going to choose one of them. You can choose more than one if you want to, but choose one and then explain how those words that have been said by the characters, how they kind of the conflict in the characters' relationship, how do the words kind of emphasize that and demonstrate the kind of the fighting and the hatred between the two people. So that's what I want you to do. So choose one, and using the quotes, you can zoom in on the precise words, or you can talk about a phrase that's a bit bigger. But explain how those individual words and phrases really help to demonstrate the conflict between the two characters. If you want to pause the video here, you can do while you complete task one. Once you've done task one, you can move on to the next. Unpause the video and move on to the next task. Right, so the second one of our kind of the patterns and structures of a language that Shakespeare uses is the use of contrasts. Contrasts occur when the language of one character is mirrored by the language of another. Sometimes one character uses contrast to make their ideas more dramatic and effective. So by putting two characters together, they might be on the same time. There might be a little bit of a space between them, but by having that contrast, it really kind of links or shows the change or the difference between two kind of key ideas. So when we look at the first one, with the red blob here, the ghosts to Richard and to Richmond, when we look at the contrast between those ghosts and what they say to the two characters, that can help the audience understand the different kind of personalities of the two men. So ghosts to Richmond say, despair and die. Ghosts to Richmond say, live and flourish. So there's the contrast, now highlighted to you in red. The next one in green is some lines from James Tyrrell. Now the film version that we're using, Tyrrell doesn't really say much, and that's partly to do with the kind of the production of that film, kind of making the whole thing a little bit more streamlined. But in the play, Tyrrell has a couple of fairly big speeches, and he has one particularly long speech when he describes the killing of the two princes. And here we've got the contrast in his speech where he describes Richard in the first section and he describes the princes in the second. So this is his thoughts on Richard. He says, bloody king, tyrannous and bloody act, ruthless butchery. And when he describes the princes, he says, alabaster innocent arms, replenished sweet work of nature, 4 red roses on a stalk, summer beauty. So hopefully the contrast is clear in his language there. The types of things he says about Richard is contrasted even more extremely because of the way he says what he says about the two princes. And the third one we're looking at is now highlighted in yellow, which is Richard talking to young Prince Edward when he arrives back in London. Richard says, your grace attended to their sugared words, but look not on the poison of their hearts. And Richard here is talking about the various uncles that, according to him, have been treacherous and have had to be executed for their evil plans towards Prince Edward. Okay. Here, though, I've highlighted in yellow and blue the contrasting words for you. All right. So that's the kind of intro and examples for contrasts. We click forward now, and here's the task, the contrasts that I want you to do. So the task is select one of the contrasts below and explain how the use of contrast has increased the drama and effect of the language being used. So your answer is focusing on the idea that these three examples, because of the contrast, there's been an increase in drama and effect. All right? So your job is to choose one. You can do more than one if you want. And I would like you to explain how that contrasting element, so how the language, the examples of contrast, how they have kind of enhanced and increased the drama and the effect of what's being said. Okay? So, hopefully that makes sense. Pause the video here while you work on your answer to task 2, and when you're ready, you can unpause and move on to task 3. Task 3 is all about patterns of 3 and lists. And here's the kind of explanation of what we're looking at this for. Patterns within a speech or a line can enhance the power of it. For example, 3 adjectives are sometimes used because they can build up to create an effect. Also, bad things are meant to come in threes. So that's the idea here, that using a pattern or a list of 3 can create a sense of momentum, where because the character is kind of using this structure of 3 things, it enables the actor to kind of really emphasize their feeling. They're not just saying what they feel once or twice, it's that third repetition or third version that really kind of puts the icing on the cake. So the first one we're going to look at is from Buckingham. And Buckingham here is describing Richard's kingship in Act 5, Scene 1 as underhand, corrupted, foul injustice. And I really like this quote because you've got 3 different words, but there's no commas between them. Technically you should have a comma between each of these different things, but Buckingham hasn't used commas, or Shakespeare's not given Buckingham commas, so almost like he has to get these words out so quickly. And then look at the actual words themselves. Is there much difference between these 3 ideas, these 3 adjectives? What's the difference between underhand and corrupt? What's the difference between corrupted and foul? Is this list kind of making things seem worse as you go through it, or better, or is it staying the same? You might have an answer there if you think about how those 3 words work as a sequence. The next one in blue is about Richard's delight in telling us in Act 1, Scene 1, that he is subtle, false, and treacherous. Now, again, the order of these 3 could be significant. If you look at those 3 words and say those words out loud, what it feels like to deliver them: subtle, false, and treacherous. What does that pattern of 3 enable you to do as a speaker with those 3 words? How can that really emphasize the meaning that the actor playing the part would like to deliver? Finally, in our orange yellow, the Duchess of York, Richard's mother, the Duchess of York describes Richard's characters in Act 4 by piling on adjectives. Thy school days frightful, desperate, wild, and furious. And the second one, thy age confirmed, proud, subtle, sly, and bloody. So she's gone for more than 3. She's gone for 4 in her phrases, and that means she's not a pattern of 3. She's a list of 4. How does that extra bit, how's that extra 4th one kind of change the meaning or add an effect? And again, look at the words she goes for. Is there a pattern in the order of her words? Does the order add anything to her meaning? And does that kind of create a stronger power or more effect on the audience? So those are the 3 patterns. Here's your task now. So if you want to just listen carefully to the instructions, you're going to select one of the examples below and explain how that meaning and effect are enhanced by the pattern of 3. So just choose one of the 3 we've already looked at in the previous slide, and then explain how the meaning and effect are enhanced by the pattern of 3. You can pause the video here while you think about it. If you want to, you can go back and rewind it and watch it a little bit previously all over again. When you've finished, this task at the end of the video. So make sure you sign in your work, hand in your work, and if you want to say anything in the comment section, leave me a comment in the appropriate places. Okay, thank you, and I'll have the answers to you tomorrow.